Hello again, and good existence to you! Welcome to the Quiet Palace Podcast, where great legends prevail, and evil wins to dust. Hopefully. I am your gracious host, Vet, and today we'll be looking into one of my favorite topics for Dungeons & Dragons 5e. But let me start off by asking you an important question. Any of you that have DM'd a good deal of games, you've used a lot of monsters and stat sheets of all kinds in an attempt to bring your players down, or challenge their strategic thinking. How many of those were humanoid? Do you find your encounters often lack the possibility of combat with other creatures like the ones in your party? Maybe you're a newer DM that wishes to involve more humanoids in their encounters for a plethora of possible reasons. It's believable to think that an encounter with knights of an opposing order, or bipedal language-speaking humanoids in general, would come up at some point, unless things are getting really weird. Today shall be the day that we look into how to tweak anything from a past character, or a new one you make, made of the same resources the players have, yet balanced into a challenge rating to understand how powerful you may have to make one of these antagonistic folks for a reasonable encounter in Dungeons & Dragons 5e. I will start things off by saying that, well, leveled PCs are not usually the intended enemy for you to defeat, but there are humanoid creatures you can find a stat sheet for that possess a CR and are made to fit the criteria. Those and other monsters in the same tier might be great inspiration for imagining a powerful encounter, and have some sort of limit on what they're capable of. There's only so much damage they can dish out, and so many abilities they can use. Quite frankly, just looking at the flavor text will not provide a relevant enough example for this antagonistic humanoid we're imagining. For those unfamiliar with challenge rating, when looking at the stat sheet of any monster found in the Monster Manual, Player's Handbook and beyond, you'll find such a detail listed on the sheet, giving you a number usually between an eighth or up to say 20 or somewhere beyond. The number listed is meant to determine what a party of 4 meeting the corresponding level are within their means to take down. So a CR1 brown bear is something 4 level 1 should be theoretically able to deal with without perishing on the first turn. You might be asking though, what about the CR ratings that don't equal a whole number? Like the 1/8 rating on regular bandits, for example. If you want to encounter a group that level 1s can handle, you would theoretically use 8 bandits if you wanted to give them a big encounter. Maybe defeating that collective of bandits on a rogue mission to dispatch you allows you to level up. Maybe even returning to town for a rest. You travel out again maybe a day after, having achieved level 2, only to find the former bandit captain ambushing you after you leave the city's reach. Let us dig just a bit deeper for a moment. We'll take the bandit captain as an interesting example. At level 2, one bandit captain is an adequate challenge, but can definitely do more damage than a level 2 player could on their own. A bandit captain comes with 3 melee attacks that can take in a turn, 2 with a scimitar and a less powerful jab with a dagger. Heck, the fighter in the party could probably only throw 2 attacks in a turn if they're wielding 2 weapons. It will be obvious he is an individual who could take 4 said fighters at once. When we break down the bandit's capabilities from a player's perspective, a level 5 fighter would be able to pull off what the captain can. Theoretically, that would mean a PC of this CR challenge would be able to make 3 attacks, right? Well, typically, yes. Something to consider is that player characters get access to feats, which can expand their capabilities 7-fold. Archers can rain down with harsher arrows with Sharpshooter. A fighter with Polearm Master could also make 3 attacks happen in a turn, alongside other features. CR does not seem to take into account the party's composition. If you send 4 spellcasters to deal with a Rakshasa that's immune to level 6 spells and below, and they are level 12, they are more likely than anything going to fall to that Rakshasa. That being said, a non-violent approach is a lot more assuring of survival. However, against a group of 2 barbarians, a fighter and a rogue, that Rakshasa might just be a piece of cake in comparison. Taking into account what the opposition's capabilities will be, it is good to counter some strategies to allow your party to adapt to different tactics, but I would not recommend unleashing the party's bane unless it's reasonable to do so. I find those situations rare, but perhaps such entities can be used to taunt the party and advance the narrative as opposed to just butchering them all in the streets and leaving the players to start anew. And though that bandit captain might make mincemeat of a group of wizards, battered and bloody as the captain would be, he would be best suited for a group with might and magic, being potentially countered by the heavily armored and those that would sap the captain's strength. So to conclude on that particular thought, understanding what an NPC's capabilities are is important for setting up a balanced encounter. If developing an NPC with character classes sounds like a good time to you, I can show you along the path to crafting such a thing that stands to be a legendary battle. For now, we'll keep it simple. My example for you will be a CR5 creature. That means the 4 level 5s meet an equal challenge. It gets shaky when that number varies, but I try to keep in mind that the challenge rating should shrink or rise by 25% per addition or subtraction to the head count, roughly. However, trying to recalculate everything can take a minute on short notice. If the battle is a bit harder since you're missing someone, creating an advantage that the party can gain themselves against a creature might even the odds a little more. Otherwise, let's say you're down to 3 from 4 players, and you are at CR4. Well, if they're all level 4 characters, just lower the CR by 1, changing what they fight or even nerfing the chosen encounter a bit to help things mathematically be fair in this situation. But what about the class level of our character? Well, he's CR5, and the last guy we saved was about level 5 theoretically, so a level 8 PC might be within reason. The party is 3 levels below this individual, which means our CR5 creature is definitely stronger than them, and proves the challenge to the whole party due to the level difference. Not too high to smite them all down in one hit unless things get real bad, but not too low to a point where the PCs aren't really concerned about the unstimulating heat of battle. Keep in mind that just adding 3 levels for the CR number to make this work isn't a foolproof approach, but staying within that range is definitely a recommendation I can make. Take a look through the monsters you can find at this CR rating. How much damage can they do, and how specific or influential do their abilities get? Cambions can do, well, 16 to 20 damage if we take the average. They can cast some spells that aid them or allow them to straight up escape. And they can charm a PC for 24 hours, and the save D to prevent this is 14. They have a decent charisma stat, they're fairly stealthy, and have high scores for their strength, constitution, intelligence, and charisma saves, making them quite a rounded challenge in their own right. Not to mention an AC of 19, meaning attack rolls are going to have to be half decent. A Beholder zombie can bite, doing 14 piercing damage on average. They can use a paralyzing, fearing, or damaging eye ray of varying damage types. Not to mention bringing them to 0 HP might not be the end for the creature, which can leave a lot of things to fate in that situation. In the end, this creature can sacrifice damage to give the party members more serious problems than a Cambion's charm, but then there's the eye rays. 36 to 45 damage depending on the ray, of the same 14 save DC. It's a pretty high markup on damage. That could one-shot some player characters, especially ones with, little HP. Please don't disintegrate, my friends. What's important to mention is that there is a clear range to the amount of damage a creature could unleash, especially when bundled in different abilities. The Cambion is harder to hit, and very resilient in certain saving throws, not to mention stealthier and much smarter. The Cambion would be more suitable to, say, a chase, or as a difficult challenge to PCs that suscept their enemies into saving throws. However, the Beholder zombie is better for scare, something that can just obliterate people if they don't dodge or kill the creature quickly. It is easier to hit, but harder to actually kill. You might be able to handle the Cambion without a healer, but without one facing the Beholder zombie, it could end very poorly, potentially TPKing the party or making them flee from battle unless the rolls are just flowing that night. You can run away, living to fight another day longer, but fighting against a creature you're supposed to be able to defeat within reason can feel crushing from both sides. Kudos to all the good sports out there that try anyways and feel like they don't have to win every battle to be a successful adventuring party. There is a reason you're still adventuring, right? It's because you overcame the challenge and did not allow yourself to succumb to it. They may rise to the occasion later, and that CR5 creature can always return or be found again for a rematch if it's right to do so. Let's look into 2 class builds, and use them as examples somewhat similar to the 2 monsters I've chosen to compare for a level 5 challenge. First, we have the Hexblade Warlock. The Cambion will help reference our characters so that we don't exceed any potential thresholds of difficulty. For this, I have constructed a level 8 Warlock known as Deldin, a former blacksmith, and given him some magic items to assure that he'll have a solid chance at dazzling his enemies in battle. We have 2 level 4 spell slots that can charm, weaken, or damage enemies and raise the AC of our Warlock temporarily. More magically diverse than the Cambion with fair limits. We have a deadly pact weapon that uses charisma for attack and damage purposes and stays within an average of 16 damage a round. Combined with a hex, an average of 19 or 20 is a good chunk. But keep in mind that's just one round. Not outside of reason. We can raise a specter from a fallen humanoid that adds to the battle, rounding things out a little if you need some help. The poison resistance sparks a little list for future reference, and since he's of level 8 he has 2 feats or ability score improvements. Getting a boost in charisma is important, so we did that and evened out our strength score in case grappling happens. But for this I took a standard array, and also Dwarf Warlock. Realistically, you can boost them to your liking, but I decided to use this method for a more realistic result from player characters. Taking Mage Slayer can allow him to be a real problem for the magic users in the group, should he manage to get a solid line to them, and it can allow for more damage as punishment for casting spells too close to Delden. For invocations, Eldritch Mind for Hex and general Constitution saves to maintain concentration on a spell can ensure their damage isn't waning as often. Improved Pact Weapon to diversify our magic items a little more, Thirsting Blade for the 2 attacks, otherwise 8 damage is not a great starting point. It was an obvious choice for me. And of course, why would we not want to put our spell slots to their best use? Eldritch Smite can add 4d8 of force damage considering our level 4 spell slots, and can even knock the target prone. An average of 14 extra damage while you're knocked onto your hindquarters. At least Eldon can only do that twice per short rest. Well, then there's the magic items, of course. Breastplate of Resistance, choosing fire in consideration of burning hands or other close-range fire spells. A rare item as well, and not to mention our list of resistances is looking good. Then there are 2 uncommons for just a smidge of oomph for where we need it. Brooch of Shielding gives us constant immunity to magic missile, preventing a relentless onslaught via dwarf-seeking hurdy-out torpedoes, as well as force resistance, giving wizards and even warlocks a run for their money and giving our otherwise susceptible dwarf a solid advantage. To top it all off, we have given him a Pearl of Power, allowing him in action to get a level 3 spell slot to use just for one more spell in the moments where he may need it. All in all, an individual with a strong advantage against magic users and a powerful enemy as it stands, with solid and reliable forms of damage from multiple sources. Though Delden does not have quite as much health as the average Cambion, he comes pretty close at 75 health. Taking the average at every level for a Hill Dwarf with 16 Constitution, he makes up for it in damage potential and a different but tactical approach to countering magic. Like the Cambion, he can fit out a couple of different spells, which might prove to be more influential than the Cambion's handful of limited spells a day. His weapons are slightly deadlier than our winged friend, especially with Eldritch Smite attached, though a serious lack of mobility or flight, well, we can justify the little extra juice there. With careful strategic planning on how we use our 2, technically 3 spell slots, using Eldritch Smites to tip off the healer, hexes to discourage grapplers, or the shield spell to avoid a source of potential damage altogether. Though we are easier to hit, our resistance to common forms of magical damage seems to make up for it. The 2 saving throw proficiencies are not a bad choice considering some spells that could come Delden's way, having Wisdom and Charisma from Warlock. With skills, you can choose which is most befitting to your situation. Considering I base this off a character I'm currently playing, this example has Arcana, Insight, History, and Investigation. At best, the Investigation might come up if he's hunting you, so if it could be a necessity to have Survival, Perception, and even Deception, it's within reason. These characters don't have to match each and every detail of all the features they would have as a player character normally. You can branch out a little bit if you have to, as long as it makes sense. Something I can't help but mention is that the 2 are quite thematically different. I did try to keep some of these aspects the Cambion had, but the focus was on having martial and magical capabilities above all else. I stuck with a theme, and mechanically this felt an optimal way to represent that. You can swap out the race for a winged feral tiefling and go nuts with the eldritch blasts and close-range clashes, but I picked dwarf to stay closer to the realm of sustaining themselves. Considering a lack of defenses and health otherwise for someone who's close-up, personal, and potentially alone in this fight. Sorcerer could also make sense in a way, but without the backup plan for 2 melee or ranged attacks included, well, it doesn't matter much, but it felt wrong and just way too spell-heavy. We've covered our Cambion reference, and what about our Beholder zombie? And why didn't I use Delden for this monster instead, considering the burst of damage? Well, our damage types are lacking with the Dwarf and Warlock in comparison, and considering the eye rays and their varying effects, I thought that a reborn Aberrant Mind Sorcerer would be most suitable here. We are somewhat closer to the theme than the other pair, but sorcerers have access to fire, lightning, and frost damage to mention a few, so I thought it was a good idea. Sadly, Disintegrate is quite a ways away, but if you happen to make a sufficient level sorcerer for an encounter, that would work well enough. But we have rays of our own making. Ray of Frost, Scorching Ray, and Ray of Sickness are what we have to work with in the ray department. That will suffice, and it's rays with 3 flavors. Hard to argue about. Having high constitution and charisma saves is always good. Having good deception, persuasion, and perception, should you pick that up with what the Reborn could take, might translate into an interesting bit of RP before things go sour. Not to mention some telepathy to mess with them. With access to the heightened spell and quicken spell metamagics, you can fit out a poison spray or other useful spells against your ally after attacking them with the Acheron blade. If you don't know what that is, it gives them disadvantage on the saving throw if you hit them with it once per dusk. Not so bad of a choice all around, and it fits with the Reborn aspect, though it is their rare item, so we can check that one off the list. For the others, a Luck Stone and a Cloak of Protection, because it will raise our AC, ability checks, and saving throws by a little bit, making our Sorcerer a little more durable against casters and marshals. For feats, Spell Sniper is a nice alternative for not being able to disintegrate, being able to straight up ignore 1/2 to 3/4 cover. Otherwise, other excellent choice, plus our honorable mention would be Metamagic Adept for the extra sorcery points, and the Metamagic option, and the Resilient feats. Resilient can give you a boost towards saves you might need to stand a better chance against the party. The best part about crafting a monster is being able to exploit certain weaknesses. Not just to make them suffer, but you need a little bit of lemon to make something sweet. Or whatever, you can judge me for that one. I don't care. For HP, the average leaves us with 58 health. Not great at all. Not much that can really be done without messing with some magic items. A bit, if at all. And so I decided in this case, considering his condition, taking the max might be in order, bringing us to 72. Though it's definitely not what most sorcerers have in regards to health, and, well, it could be perhaps tied to the story in some fashion that his potential for healthiness is at its peak, or another fountain of vitality has influenced them. Even then, it does not leave us with much health. Poison and psychic resistance are not going to seal off too much, all things considered. As you can see, if you were to completely dedicate all the specific things a player character would have at their disposal, you might be left with a particularly lacking battle that ends fairly quickly. If they're a caster anyways. Barbarians would at least have the health to last in most situations, and fighters don't too bad at staying alive for most of the time either. In that case, comparing our monster's health to Saunt's allotment of health as it stands might be ideal in case of making a solid encounter. For Delden, 82 health from the Cambion isn't a huge markup for what we already have, but it's within reason. For Sant, 93 health definitely gives us a fighting chance, and with nat 20s across the table at least 2 or 3 rounds before they fall into the ether like the army of kobolds who unleashed upon them once. What, just me? Well damn, maybe that's what I'll talk about for the next week. Back to Sant. Anyways, to sum up our second example for this lecture, dare I say, TED Talk? Fat Talk. I like the sounds of that one. Sant is a fairly versatile character, and with the potential being harder to hit than the zombie for the trade-off of cheesing another turn, even though you were brought to 0 HP, I thought it made sense. With 16 dex, that's 17 AC thanks to the Cloak of Protection, on top of that. We have resistance to poison and psychic damage, and the Charmed and Frightened condition because of the Reborn's traits, not to mention an immunity to sleep. So there's no way to lullaby your way out of this fight. We have high potential for skills, having a possible passive perception of 18 with the magic items, 16 wisdom, and proficiency in the skill, so it's possible that sneaking up on this one is quite the task. We have access to a large plethora of spells and have some unique adaptations for psychic spells, not to mention either more sorcery points or another saving throw proficiency if you're into that. We have a surprise punishment for people that get within melee range, and a few surefire ways of doing some serious damage, all while doing anything like burning, fearing, or melting the minds of your adventurers. To wrap this all up, we'll talk about compressing the information found for player characters, that not all of this information is going to sum up exactly. The fact that Reborn don't have to eat, that doesn't need to be on the monster stat block. Sure, it's in the lore and secondary information, but it's not at the forefront of running an encounter, so it can be ignored. Things like gaining advantage against certain conditions or resistant to certain types of damage can just be labeled as condition resistances or immunities. If you've looked at a monster stat block before, you'll know that if it's proficient in any saving throws, it's stated on the sheet as well. Their senses, like dark vision, and their secondary abilities like horrific presence or innate spellcasting. Our class spellcasting can go under a similar listing, marking leveled spell lists with 4 times or what have you so you know how many times you can abuse magic missile. Extra attack can be conveyed as multi-attack. Some creatures can use some attacks multiple times. In this case, your character can make 2 weapon attacks with what weapons it can use should it gain this ability from the class you've given them. Any special actions, main actions, bonus actions, and reactions you have, but not any of the spells, can be listed at the bottom, with a brief description of what they do, just so there's not too much flavor text blocking up the things you're trying to quickly recall. It's not life or death, the story of how I became able to do that isn't there. It's all about keeping things short and sweet. Anything you need to know for the character in regards to the story should be written somewhere else entirely. I hope these examples helped you in understanding how to balance a leveled NPC with classes as a D&D combat encounter. I like to believe that what we have discussed today are reasonable guidelines for delving into homebrew combat encounters based on monsters straight from Wizards of the Coast's written material. Let me know what you thought about this one in the comments. Even if I royally messed this one up, I wouldn't mind hearing about it. And if you liked it, well hey, then that's one cool thing I've shown the world to see if it works in their D&D games. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this one. I don't know, I've messed around with a couple of these ideas in the past. Just kind of, something that would come up where I'm like, well, maybe this stack sheet for this character isn't terribly descriptive, and, I just kind of wanted to add detail to it, and, maybe give them something more dedicated than just, a couple of select spells that everyone else like them in this entire world has. I mean, those usually suffice, and, it's on brand, and that's fair. I have nothing wrong with that, but, for one-shots especially, I don't mind the idea of testing out certain character builds even just as opposition for these particular instances. So, with that being said, one example I can explain would be an encounter that I created for a couple of friends of mine. They were defending a sacred grove from an onslaught of, you name it, in this case, beasts, more or less, that descended on them that they had to defend the sacred grove from. And then eventually its leader came down, and there's a humanoid, a man named Kletz, who was a dual sword-wielding madman, just a fighter that came out of nowhere, said nothing, refused to elaborate, and started to take them on. It was quite a serious battle. It was a CR5, if I'm not mistaken. They were level 5 when they took this dude on. And it was just two of them, too. One of them was martial, one of them was like a half-caster of some kind. I don't remember exactly what was going on, but this was a while ago. And I mean, it turned out pretty well. Ultimately, his magic items that I gave him, one of them was homebrewed, but didn't have a super serious thing. It was basically just like a sort of speed, like a little bit of ice damage put on it, I'm pretty sure. So that's as far as I've gotten with that concept. Was just a dude that hit people really hard. And I know, when it comes to adding spells to boss battle instances, I know that can really kind of mess with things, because you don't know what spells they would get and what those can say universally. I mean, not that you're giving your people a wish spell, yeah, of course that's going to turn the tides of a lot of things, but I mean, there's a lot of different spells out there that I couldn't even begin to name that can really screw people over and kind of increase the CR on people without them realizing it too. Is they're just like, well, the character can do that, so it must still be within reason, right? Not necessarily. I mean, it depends on what they're creating, like, an Arcanoloth that maybe summons, other instances to his side. That's kind of what I've experienced using this kind of mechanic or strategy as an example for like certain battles you could make that would still be challenging and have player levels so that it feels like you're fighting a realistic, achieved individual. Most people put up a dragon for me, or something that's maybe normally a monster but skinned as a dude that just has these capabilities, which could still make sense. Somebody who walks in that room who could do the same things that a Death Knight can might have just gone down a similar path and become exactly what they are. That's an interesting example. And the method works well for me. I don't know what kind of feedback I'll get from that. But I hope you enjoyed this one. Hope you guys are having a good night or a good day or whatever. It's been another episode of the Quiet Palace Podcast. Episode 2. Not too bad. I think episode 3 is going to be an easy go for it in regards to subject, so next week when we cover large battles and such, we'll see where things go. In the meantime, take care. We'll see you soon.